right there. There's your last chance. All right. Good. All right, welcome. My name is Eric. I'm here with Al, Brandon. We are the co-hosts of the No Code PH Product Hunt community here in New York. And today we're going to talk with some awesome and cool people who are going to walk us through a little bit of both. So we have Nash, head of ops at Clay, and we have Toma from Community Lawyer, who's the head of design, operations, and everything else.
We're a four-person company, so
yeah.
25% of everything.
We're going to be speaking with them today, do a little fireside chat. Al is going to head this up, and then after that we'll break off and we'll do a little talk about Bubble, where you guys are today, and then we'll spend the rest of the evening chatting about Product Hunt and how you guys can get featured on Product Hunt and what that looks like. All right? I'm going to pass it off to Al and our speakers. I think you guys each get one of these.
I think he gets one.
I think, yeah, we possibly
We share one.
Oh, okay.
You can.
We're working on our AV. We'll improve.
I feel like the opposite of what Donald Trump is feeling.
All right, guys, I think we're going to first start off by just doing like a few minutes of introductions for Toma and Nash, and then I'll ask both of them some questions, and then we'll take some audience questions from you guys as well. So, Toma, want to introduce yourself and Community Lawyer?
Gladly. This is working?
It is.
Very good. My name is Toma Officer. I'm one of the co-founders of Community Lawyer. I'm an attorney, graduated law school in 2012. I've been working in legal tech ever since. Started Community Lawyer in 2016 at a tech incubator in Brooklyn called Blue Ridge Labs. Blue Ridge Labs funds social entrepreneurs who have a hypothesis of how tech could help low-income New Yorkers. So we received a grant with a very wide-open mandate. And we were looking at this issue, which is a poorly kept secret in the legal industry, that lawyers are largely for corporations and wealthy individuals. Most people can't afford a lawyer. And when I say most people, I mean pretty much all people. So initially what we did is we were just matchmaking attorneys with clients. Attorneys would agree to scale their fees. What we ended up doing was flooding attorneys with clients. Who doesn't want an attorney that scales their fees? The next question became, how can we increase an attorney's capacity? And we discovered there were those attorneys who were also software engineers. And for all of 30 seconds, we thought, well, why don't we teach attorneys how to become software engineers? And then we changed our mind and we decided to build our no-code app builder. That's what Community Lawyer does. A very quick example of how it's used. 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration added 6 countries to the travel ban. I have my own opinions, but I'll leave those out of it. In any case, if you're pursuing any kind of immigration status in the United States, this might have thrown your whole process into chaos. So on Friday, this came into effect. On Saturday, an attorney used our platform to make an app that they distributed to the public on Sunday. And then on Monday, they could make an app version 2, version 3, based on their peers' feedback. So this is an app. It looks a lot like LegalZoom. It looks a lot like TurboTax. That's what you can make on Community Lawyer. We're trying to increase access to justice by empowering attorneys to make software. It's a very long intro. But
No, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. And Nash, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Nash. I'm head of operations at clay.run. There's like another clay.earth that exists in this world also. We're based out of Brooklyn in Williamsburg, and we have built a spreadsheet that fills itself, essentially. It's kind of like spreadsheet meets workflows meets enrichment and API functions, running serverless functions. And so it's a tool that anyone can plug a function or an API directly into a spreadsheet and apply it to their data without any code, or build their own functions into the spreadsheet and others can then switch it on or off. I have been in the no-code, low-code space for a couple of years now. I was at First Round prior to Clay, where we've invested in a couple of companies, including Glide, which shall not be named, Bubble, but Notion also, as well as Clay and Steady. And so spent a fair amount of time from the investor side before transitioning over to the operator side and doing some real work.
Awesome, nice, short and sweet. So we are at the No Code NYC meetup. So I'm going to start off with a very basic question. What interested you in the no code movement? And feel free to go in any order as you want. Yep. And for Nash, maybe it's like before First Round, maybe what got you into this space?
Yeah, I think no code is interesting because like there's a no code movement and then there's been like no code products for a long time. And so being a non-technical person, I was a user of Squarespace or of Wix, yeah. Squarespace, Wix, all of these like visual development tools to actually partake in the world in a way that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And then you have all of the others that have been built since that are like slightly more technical, allowing you to go further along the stack. But my interest in it started because of the access that it provides to people. And then being at First Round and digging into the API space, I became really fascinated by all of these microservices that are forming the backends of companies increasingly. And what does the stitching look like between them? Like, how do you create companies that scale across microservices? And that's kind of where I ended up going deep into a different side of no code. But I've always found it fascinating because it's existed for the past X amount of years, and it's kind of just come to prominence with a very specific part of no code we talk about today.
Cool. Come on.
Hey.
It's a tiny microphone.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. I was introduced to no code. It was a very practical solution to a problem. If anyone's pursued early stage capital, there's this awkward dance where you don't want to invest too much up front because you don't know if your idea is totally shit. But you need to show some kind of traction to get someone to fund this thing. So no code was the solution to that. And so at Blue Ridge Labs, this tech incubator, we have many fellows, many grant recipients who use Bubble, who use all the different no coding tools, just to get something out there, create what we call like Wizard of Oz prototypes. As far as the end user is concerned, it's this fully automated, perfect end product. What's happening on the back end is there's no computer, there's just a human acting on the other side of it. No code is how we do all that.
Cool. And are there examples of like no code products and tools that you've built or you've seen someone built that you want to call out as really interesting? Could be at community.lawyer or at Clay, or just like with spreadsheets, which I'm really passionate about, or anything else that you've seen that was like, wow, this was really awesome.
Yeah, there's this thing we started noticing, and we called it Zapier nests. These were attorneys. They're not software engineers. They know that they need to use tech somehow to capture this like slim margin legal market, which is, most of us, like an attorney's not gonna make a ton of money off serving us if they try to make it affordable. Anyway, so they know that tech is involved in this, and we saw that they were like stringing together like 30, 40, 70 zaps into this complicated web app that effectively made this like tenant protection web app. Like a tenant in Chicago could use this thing to draft a letter to their landlord, like there's black mold in my shower. That's why I'm not paying as much rent this month. But all it was is a series of zaps, and so that I thought was really, really cool.
Zapier nest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similarly, we had someone who was chatting with us in an intercom the other day who had created his own personal, he's at Nihilus and like a technical individual, but his landlord no longer, his banking system no longer sends checks, and so he built his own little tool to automate the invoice to a check to sending it over to his landlord, which I thought was cool. But then at First Round, a lot of we have one engineer, we vacillate between like 3 engineers and 1 engineer. And First Round is a seed stage fund, I forgot to mention, here in New York and in San Francisco. But a lot of our backend is a combination of Zapier, of Airtable, of Salesforce, of Tray. And so that's kind of what the stack on that side looks like too. Yeah, I think it's fascinating with no code to see like what is the back end of a company versus like what are these things that individuals are cobbling together. We also had a company that we had invested in at First Round called Radvocate, which was entirely built on a back end of no code. And part of the question I think with no code also sometimes is, do you end up having to raise to then go and build a technical back end, or like what are the boundaries of what you can build on code? And so that was that's something that I find fascinating also. Cool.
And it also feels like there's a ton of people on Twitter talking about no code. So I'm curious who you guys follow in the no code space. It could be Twitter or in real life. Just curious who you guys consider to be thought leaders in the no code space.
Brianne Kimmel does a ton of tweeting about no code. She's an angel investor out of San Francisco. But she's great. Yeah, she's great.
She also runs a VC called Worklife, I believe.
Yep.
VC,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she was an angel, transitioned to like a VC fund now, and she's invested in Webflow and in this other company called Tamba, and a bunch of different no-code. I think she's the most like active no-code person I see talking on my timeline, but a bunch of people are talking about it all the time. So, yeah.
Do you follow anyone in particular?
No, not in particular, but the first time I ever heard about no code, it was in like 2012, and it was through Indie Hackers. And the context was individuals who were doing these side hustles, oftentimes not software engineers, and they said, "Oh, I'm now making like $100 a month with this thing I put together using this, that, and the other thing." And I was like, "What? What is this?" Because for me, no code was always just a practical solution to a problem. I want to make something quickly. I don't want to invest a bunch of time. I don't want to hire someone. It needs to be good enough for someone to fund me, and then potentially, yeah, that has been the conversation in the no code space I've seen as well. As it's used for the skateboard. By the time you have enough money to build a rocket ship, you do you burn it and then build something from scratch? Yeah. I've seen a lot of that.
And you mentioned indie hackers. I'm curious, like, what other, like, we're obviously the New York City no code community. I'm curious what other communities you guys participate in, be it no code or something else that's related to your work.
I have to plug Blue Ridge Labs. They have another round open right now. So 60K, no strings attached to anyone who is serving the modest means community in New York. But they're always talking about it. They're always bringing in designers. They're always bringing in funders. They're always talking about how you can do just enough to get that next round of funding. And the conversation wasn't always no code in quotes. Like, I feel like that's been a relatively new thing. Like it's now this buzzword, and they're realizing that they can say that and capture a lot of people's attention. But initially it was just like rapid prototyping or like, lean UX. Like that was how we talked about no code.
Okay.
I don't know if I have no code communities per se. I think the thing that's interesting is a lot of the no code companies are technical teams that are building them, and so they talk a lot about abstraction and like how do you simplify, how do you build software that delights. And so I think being at a company which is doing that similar to code or similar to Bubble, a lot of the conversations around like how do you abstract and how do you simplify, and that's more of the conversations, or how do you allow it to scale, or how do you make the infrastructure stronger. But I think those are more of the conversations that we're seeing from that side.
And how do you guys, at your different companies, like how do you guys handle your community of users and experts? Like how do you guys see that playing out for your different companies?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So for background, Clay has like two primary communities that we work with. The first is like non-technical individuals, and I hate like technical, non-technical differentiation, but those who are not planning to code with the product, that are stitching together using the different pieces of Clay. But then given that we have this marketplace functionality of building functions that others are then able to use, we rely a lot on having a strong developer community. And so I think that that's a line that we're learning to tread between speaking to one side, but also not turning off the other side. Because I think that a lot of these products are more powerful the more people are stretching their limitations and building on top of them. So we try and straddle that line. TBD.
Okay.
Still trying.
Yeah. Still early days for Clay.
Still early days, yeah.
If I understand this question properly, we were just talking about this a little while ago. At Community Lawyer, we rely heavily on, we call them builders, our app builders. Because it's not very effective to approach attorneys and be like, oh, it's a sandbox, you can build anything. Like, well, that's intimidating, what do I build? What we do now is, well, look, like your peers are building this thing. So however you understand that thing, you should understand us as being the thing that allows you to build it. So that's how we use experts. It's like the cornerstone of the flywheel of our user acquisition. Someone makes a thing, they publish it on Twitter, other attorneys are like, that's really cool, how did you make it? Then they hear about Community Lawyer. Some folks, if they're really, really in the scene already, will find us online, and that's how most people find us, but it's been far more effective to show and point to what other people are doing.
I was going to say, I think that's a great point, because part of it is that people are building software just with different blocks, and so how you help people to understand the building blocks of the software as well. Like a ton of these companies, even Codo or Notion, or like build this much, and then you have to let people know like how they start there in order to understand like what they can build with it, given that it's the first time that they're building software.
Digging more into the builders, have you ever seen a case where like a lawyer built something on Community Lawyer and then like realized they could potentially monetize what they built, and then they like stop becoming a lawyer and like start building stuff? Or has that happened before?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. The way, I mean, that's part of what we're relying on as a company. But the way we get you, this is a good thing for everyone. We're not getting you. No, we convince you that this is something you should just do for internal purposes, just speed up your own office operations. Just build some no-code tools for that. Once you've done that, you might be surprised to find, and we'll connect you with other attorneys who have the exact same problem. And you may not have thought of it this way, but that automation you made in our platform for yourself is really a SaaS product waiting to be sold to your peers. And so we have a whole suite of features that allow you to take this thing you made for yourself, toggle some different parts of it as white labelable so that the next attorney can just put their logo on it, they can put their own copy on it, and then you collect a monthly fee from them.
Wow, okay. There's a ton of overlap in the audience, I think, with the product hunt community. So this question is more around products that you use. Is there a product that you use every day that you think the audience may not know about? Could be on your phone, could be a physical product, app, whatever you want to say. Something that you think no one will know about here, that you use every day.
I don't know if there's anything that no one would know about here that I use. I'm like a very tame toolbox. I love Loom. Loom is giving me life at the moment. It's so great. That's the level.
What is Loom, by the way?
Loom is a video platform where you can record your screen and then send a link or embed in a bunch of different stuff. And you can record your face, so you can make product demos with it, but you can also just send it to your engineer if something is not working out. But that's the level of smooth experience that I aspire to and think is pretty incredible. And that's become a really big piece of my workflow. And fascinatingly, you're seeing kids start to use it to communicate, which is not at all the use case, but that's an interesting one that I love at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that too. People communicating.
It's really
in conversation about the video that was sent back.
Yeah,
and forth.
yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting use case for sure.
It's super good.
How many people here use Loom at all?
That and Cloud App.
Yeah, okay, so it's relatively new.
I love Loom. And then we live on Notion, and my life's on Notion now.
Loom has been, steadily trending upwards.
Yeah. They're really good. Their experience is really, really strong.
Yeah.
I also love Loom. I'm very new to Loom. I discovered it a couple weeks ago, and it's changed.
Magic,
It's changed how I do sales emails. So good. No, I don't think I have any tool that anyone wouldn't have heard about. I work in Sketch all the time. I also love Webflow. I use Webflow a lot. Sometimes when we're talking to attorneys and we're helping them conceptualize what it means to have a public-facing product, that's always a big leap for them. Internal facing, just for myself, or my staff, my paralegals to automate some documents, no problem. As soon as you make it public facing, it's what are we? This is not what attorneys normally do. And so we'll whip up a little Webflow site and this is, we'll take their website, all their branding, put it on a little Webflow site, get it back to them that afternoon, be this is what we're talking about. This is how you should be collecting new clients, and instantly they grok it, and we can have some more meaningful sales calls.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a tiny plug for Clay actually, because we have a really cool tool that is still in beta. So it's a Chrome extension, but it allows you to grab any repeated item that's on a website and in one click copy and paste it into a spreadsheet. So if you scroll for jobs in New York and there's a ton of jobs, you can copy the job, the name, the person, blah, 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 and paste that into a sheet in a second. So that's something that I've been using because I've otherwise been copy pasting a ton.
Yeah. So long story short, download Loom when you get back to your desk.
Magic.
Chrome extension and the native.
Yeah, the desktop one is really sick.
Yeah. So I want to get some more specific questions for each of you. So for Toma, Community.Lawyer is a public benefit corporation.
Yes.
Right? Can you explain what that is and why you guys decided to make the company a PBC?
PBCs are super cool. They came about maybe 10 years ago when Ben & Jerry's was sold, and Ben & Jerry's wasn't a PBC, and Ben & Jerry's famously does all these things that you can expect from a Vermonter, Bernie 2020. They have certain pay equity, that they have recycling programs, maternity, paternity leave, and their acquirer was fantastic. First thing we're going to do is we're going to cut all this pay equity nonsense. We're going to cut this recycling program. And they're well, that's not what we want. That's not what Ben & Jerry's is about. So we're not going to sell ourselves to you anymore. It turns out, as a corporation, your duty is to the shareholders to maximize your profit. That's your only duty. Ben & Jerry's had to go through with that sale, start a whole conversation about, well, how do we change, how do we give the board and the executive who's in charge of running the company, how do we give them another option to take? So a public benefit company is that thing. So we pursue profit for our shareholders like every other for-profit company. We also are allowed to pursue what is more classically like a nonprofit style mission. So ours is increase access to affordable legal help. And so if we're faced across like a fork in the road where it's this one like make way more money for the shareholders, this one make less money for the shareholders, but have a far greater impact in our chosen benefit, we're allowed to legally take that second road.
Cool. And then, and Nash, I want to go back to your first round experience. When they opened, well, I guess when they kind of launched their New York City office in 2018, you were hired along with some other folks to like lead the charge. I'm curious what differences you see between New York and the West Coast in terms of companies launch, companies seeking funding, anything you want to talk about between the two coasts?
Sure. I think that the ecosystems that you end up seeing are like a product of the other companies surrounding them and the types of things that people are doing. And so New York, the bet on New York is that there's going to be a lot of interesting companies that are going to be cropping up over the next couple of years. And part of that is where will talent be exiting from over the next couple of years. And so as you have more exits in the ecosystem, you end up with more people that have experience scaling a company or have experience, have cash now maybe from an exit that allows them to like spend more time building a company. And so you end up with really interesting pockets, like you'll have healthcare because of Flatiron's exits, or you'll have MongoDB will have like highly technical talent, or Oscar will have healthcare also. And so we see a lot of tech applied to legacy industries in what is fintech, healthcare, or consumer, like New York is very good for consumer. But also as you have exits on the West Coast, you end up with kind of this exodus towards like real cities and real life as people are kind of moving east. And so even like there's a really interesting Snap community of a bunch of folks who are super early at Snap that have since moved over to New York. And so I think that you see different types of companies. A lot of our very technical founders that are building new software into the world rather than applying software to industries are on the West Coast, and a lot of what we see in terms of innovation on traditional business models is what we're seeing in New York City. Yeah, it's fascinating to see just like the communities that come out of companies and how those actually shape what you end up seeing. Like we'll see a bunch of alums from Glossier that will be coming out over the next couple of years, which is interesting too.
I definitely think that's like one of the most noticeable things that I've seen, traveling back and forth often.
Yeah.
I think that there's a huge, like, based on touching on the exits, fintech, especially like Wall Street bankers that like retire, right, leave with a cat sack of money. And for years, they are not necessarily like looking for investments, but they're looking for that next project kind of thing, right? Like what to get involved with next. Yeah. So there's a lot of them that have obviously access to capital, but more so like they're trying something new. So I found that like I've met a lot of people who left banks that are looking for information and how to build, you know, a lean way, you know, and this future no-code movement without having to basically apply all their capital they should earn for their whole life. Start the opposite way.
Yeah, and it's true because you have the companies that people have grown up in are different on both coasts, and so you have like a lot of tech or consulting or banking, and so like how do you get started? To what Tomas was saying also is like how do you get prototype up and running before you go and like raise a bunch of money or like self-fund for X amount of months, years.
Such like enterprise systems where you need approval, like from a manager or you know, many people are building at once and pull requests. Instead it's like just release and go, you build in the open, like that's foreign to bankers.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
Cool. And then for Toma, like, what are some of the most interesting legal cases you've seen at Community.Lawyer? Just curious, like the most interesting, unique.
That's a good question. They're run-of-the-mill things. It's you know, if you've ever been to housing court, I hope none of you have. But it's pretty, you know, run-of-the-mill basic issues, but everyone has them, and the court is clogged beyond what I think anyone would imagine if you hadn't stepped in there. So most of the people who use our platform, they're building things for just that basic, what we call consumer legal issues. What's cool is how they're doing it. So for example, there is a legal procedure you can do if you're getting older and you're worried about losing capacity. This is the ability to like make decisions for yourself. You can nominate someone else as a power of attorney, giving them the means to actually dive into your bank account, sometimes correct some fraudulent things that might have happened if someone convinced you over the phone to, anyway, it's a good thing to do. It's called a power of attorney. It's not a very cool way to sell that idea. No one's like, oh, I need to get a power of attorney. We saw this attorney make a standalone website in Scotland, which is where I went to law school, that is framing it as give your loved ones the power to help you before you can't. It's interesting to see attorneys think about how their legalese and their service translates to people's actual lived reality. Like, I don't want a power of attorney. I'm scared about my mother aging and I don't have the means to dive into her bank account or reverse the sale of her apartment because someone got her to do that and she didn't have capacity to really make that choice. So that's what's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're turning these really complicated legalese things into more human relatable concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the trick is for this is where we get involved a bit as well, is when people are online, they're not instantly typing, I want to find a family law attorney. I mean, they often are, but if you want to try to compete in that space, legal AdWords are the most expensive AdWords possible, because obviously you're about to sell your house. That's a rich moment. But there's a way easier method of competing, which is if you can sit and think well, what are some of the issues someone's going to be searching online before they type in that inevitable, I want to find a family law attorney. And so we're trying to train attorneys, and some of us are coming back and surprising us on how they do it so well, on changing the way that they're marketing their services or their products if they make it with us, and using more human understandable tactics.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. And then Nash, kind of going back to your first round days a little bit, what are some of the challenges faced by founders with temporary work visas? And and also how can VC funds help support these founders with things besides capital?
Yeah, how they can add value.
How they can add value, exactly.
So I've been on visas that's been 10 years I've been in America, so I should have applied for a green card by now, but I've been slacking. But I think so there's one fund which is doing really great work called Unshackled in San Francisco, and they work with immigrant founders specifically, because a large part of it is when you're an immigrant in this country, you have to be under a work visa, and so you cannot actually take 3 months out or 6 months out or time to launch, let alone time to figure out if you even want to start a company. And so I think that in that middle space, there's really only Unshackled that is helpful, because they'll take over your work visa and sponsor you so that you can actually start building your company. But past that, what it means to have your family stay in the country, what it means to make attorney services available to founders, good attorneys, and help put the paperwork together, a bunch of that is where VCs can be helpful to immigrant founders after. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to have to be tethered to a company curtails deeply what you're able to do or even think that you can do. So and yet so many of the companies in this country were started by immigrants, or the child of an immigrant, and 40% of the Fortune 500. So I think it's fascinating when you look at, to your point earlier, what immigration bans mean, or what an H-1B reversal means, etc. That's a bunch of fucking companies that aren't going to be created in this country, which is terrible. And so yes, I think that's where people can help, is in facilitating that for founders.
Did you see any differences between the companies that those with temporary visas were starting versus those just from the United States?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting with immigrant founders is that your purview of the world is slightly different sometimes. So one of the companies that first ran back is called Nova Credit, who are in New York, who are in San Francisco, but in New York now, because a lot of the Fortune 500s are here that they're selling into. And theirs is around portable credit. So now having been here for 10 years, my whole credit history is here. If I move back to London, I'm starting from scratch. So what does it mean to be able to port credit? And that's something that Nova has built out. At Clay, we are 7, soon to be 10, and I think only 2 people were actually born in the US out of our company. And so I think that you think slightly differently about the world sometimes, in the same way that just general diversity in the workplace breeds a more thoughtful approach to how you think about your product.
Do you happen to see similar problems trying to be tackled in different areas of the world, such as global sustainability or clean air in Asia versus clean water supply somewhere else? Have you seen like a trend in certain areas of like specific types of
Yeah, it's a good question. So First Round invests only in the US. So a lot of what we see as founders that we're building for the US market first and then branching out. Actually, even Bubble wouldn't be here if it weren't for that, because Emmanuel is French. But I think that I spend a lot of time looking at technology in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is where my family is from. And I think that there you're building the infrastructure at the same time as the application layer. And so you have a lot that people are trying to build around infrastructure at the same time, which is really interesting. Because for example, like so much of the economy runs on deliveries, right? Whether it's food deliveries or like Amazon deliveries. Here, how do you deliver if you don't have like a street address? You have to build the GPS system to be able to do so. And so I think that when you look at companies that are being built in said countries, or even like in the UK with different legislation, like healthcare is not attractive in the UK because we have the NHS, whereas here it's like very lucrative. So I think that when they're building back home, you see different companies, but by the time companies are being built in the States, they by and large think differently, but are pretty similar in starting point. That was a lot. I talked fast. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm a fast talker.
And then for Toma, the American Bar Association passed a resolution to consider regulatory innovations as a way to get better access to quality legal services. Curious what role you think coming to a lawyer might play with that resolution, and did you have an impact on that resolution?
We didn't have an impact on that resolution.
Okay.
We were privy to some of the screaming that was happening behind closed doors. Not everyone's excited about this. I'm sure you know. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about this resolution and why it's like a big deal?
Yeah. So the American Bar Association passed a resolution that advises the state bars, which are the entities that dictate the rules for the legal profession in every state. They passed this resolution that says, relax different rules or completely break old rules. We need to start thinking creatively about what we can do because the house is on fire. This is Jim Sandman from the LSC, the Legal Services Corporation. They fund legal aid. He's been coming out and he's been very vocal. The legal system is broken for most people in America. It's like fundamentally broken. So we need to start getting creative with the regulations on the legal industry itself if we want to fix it. Utah is doing something really cool. This had a big role, I think, in the ABA passing this resolution. Utah's creating a regulatory sandbox for I think it's 6 months, maybe a year. For this period of time, a bunch of regulations are going to be lifted. Community lawyers' involvement is any attorney in Utah that wants to participate in this. And some of the regulations are things like the way you advertise your services or the prohibition against splitting legal fees with individuals who aren't in the law firm, which is another way of saying like getting folks incentivized to start building things for the legal services market. Utah's going to lift those rules, and we've approached all the attorneys who are going to participate in this and says, if you think that maybe tech could be a useful part of this hypothesis you want to test in Utah, don't invest a bunch of money and make something from scratch. Use community lawyer, and that's how we're involved in this. Yeah.
Who are the people that are like against the resolution? I'm curious, why would they say technology is bad, or like?
They don't say technology is bad. They say that the rules were put in place for good reason. For example, this prohibition against splitting legal fees that the UK has lifted, that Australia has lifted, that the US still has in place. The reason that was put in place is to keep undue pressure from being placed on attorneys. Like an attorney is supposed to be exercising this sacred judgment call on whether or not you have a case. They shouldn't be getting pressure from a boss who's not a lawyer, who's just trying to maximize some profit. Like, yeah, absolutely, they got a case. Like, let's bring them in. So the people who are against relaxing these rules are saying, one, they're put in place for good reason. The critique to that would be the world has changed dramatically in the past 5 years, even more in the past 50 years when some of these rules were put in place. We need to start thinking more creatively. But also, a lot of attorneys are concerned that these changes and folks like us, when we help other lawyers make legal apps, we're going to be cannibalizing or we're going to enable their peers to cannibalize their market. It's tough. It's a constant conversation we have to have. And the pitch we make to these attorneys is, these folks aren't buying your services anyway. This is a market that's completely overlooked. It's the untapped, modest means community. If all of them decides to hire your competitors, it should have no difference on your book because none of them were coming to you anyway. That's that's the pitch we make, and it's been well received, but there are some folks who are just, more of the same is the general cry against it.
It gets into that whole like technology automation versus humans doing the job kind of thing.
Yeah.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, why will there be lawyers in the future if the AI has just run amok in the legal community? AI in quotation marks, like no one has a firm grasp on what it means. It always seems to mean that, well, once it comes out, there'll be no more need for lawyers. It's like, what is this world you're living in?
All I've seen so far really, like use case wise, has been like document drafting and like due diligence documents, preparing or reading of. Like I can't see that replacing the lawyer. In fact, just enabling him to accomplish more, right? Or there's like levels that people should be excited about. But I certainly think just like any AI in any other industry, there's a fear, natively that we would be replaced.
No, AI is super dumb. And what we tell attorneys is practice at the top of your license. Like you did not go to law school in order to like do find and replace on 1,000 documents. Like there's things that really do require your human judgment. We want to free up your time to do more of that. Everything else is nonsense and should be automated.
How are you supposed to abuse the associates?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so stepping away from the legal profession a little bit, for Nash, when we're building products, we are trying to achieve this nirvana of product market fit to get our users growing and get our company to grow. And I'm curious can you describe what founder market fit means?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Examples of that?
Sure. So at Seed, which is where First Round invests, what you're looking at is like companies that barely exist. Sometimes they're an idea, or sometimes they're a deck, or sometimes they're a prototype. And so a lot of what we would think about is, why is this the person to tackle this market? And that actually comes before product market fit. And in some ways, what it looks like sometimes is like interesting instincts for the market that you're building into. And that can come from, I've spent 15 years as a consultant, or I've spent 15 years as an attorney, and now I think that like actually this is an opportunity. Or it can be, I spent 2 years like interviewing 100 of these individuals in this profession, and like I have this insight and this is what I'm going to go after. And so that's kind of how we think about founder market fit. I had written a piece which is thinking about founder market fit from another perspective, and looking at it from Chance the Rapper's perspective, and like how he went after how he grew to be the independent artist that he is today, and like the first independent artist on SNL, etc. And part of that is that he made a gamble very early that distribution was more important to him than revenue. And so by putting out mixtape after mixtape, by being independent and being able to speak to his audience, that gamble is what paid off in making him who he is today. And that's like the trajectory that the like VC hockey stick we like to see, is like how you can look at what his trajectories look like. And those are the instincts that you can look for in founders as to like how and why they're building this company, more than like the thing itself that they're building today, because that's going to change fundamentally over the next 10 years of the company.
Mm-hmm. I guess, have you seen examples of companies that have good product market fit, but then bad founder market fit? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think that you need an element of founder market fit to get to product market fit. The thing that's really interesting after is founders, sometimes like people are not meant to be in the same role for 10 years all the time. And so sometimes like you're good at building the thing from scratch, and then it gets to 500 people and now you're a people manager, and that's not actually what you wanted to do in the first place. And so you see that with companies all the time, where you'll have like a founder who's now a chairman and has like seeded to a CEO, or Looker is a great example of that with the team there, where Lloyd was the originator of the thought process behind it, but he wasn't the person to be the CEO through the life of the company. And it's when you get to a certain amount of product market fit that you can start to make that distinction. I think it's hard to get to product market fit without founder market fit, because that's what allows you to build in the way that you're building it.
Mm-hmm. On that with Looker,
yeah.
One of the reasons that Google agreed to acquire them was that they were willing to, and had already planned leadership change, in which Frank would take over as CEO and run like operations.
Mm-hmm.
Would stay within the Google Cloud,
Mm-hmm.
like just an acquired sub company of Alphabet. So yeah, I found that really interesting. That that's part of what took so long to finish the deal, was ensuring that like all
the pieces were in place.
were like place than there was a new CEO in place.
Yeah, absolutely. That takes like a high level of self-awareness and being able to separate yourself from your company, because a lot of the time your identity, vulnerability, and your identity is your company for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So, yeah.
Okay. Anyone in the audience have questions for Toma or Nash? Just going to open the floor for anyone to ask a question.
Thomas, for you, maybe if you can comment on the diversity or variety of the use cases or solutions that your users are building. Is it more like handful of the same all over again, or it's like very diverse use cases and they constantly kind of surprise and improve what you're achieving out?
Yeah. I'm just going to repeat the question. So the question was, have you seen what are the diversity of use cases that you've seen from Community.Lawyer?
A lot of diversity, but the apps themselves follow a really basic structure. It's an online form that collects information. It can put it on a document, it can send it to a database, or it can pull from a database. That's it. Like, your app is going to take that shape. Now, we have some attorneys who use it just for internal purposes. Like, this never sees the light of day. Like, it just lets me input some info, and then I got this whole suite of financing documents for my client's next round. And then we have the Judicial Council of California. This is the organization that oversees all the different courts in California. They use Community.Lawyer as a really fast way to prototype ideas they have for self-help tools for pro se litigants. These are individuals who go to court without an attorney. They're super smart on their product development strategy. They have an excellent team. They know that, and they've been burned in the past. You can spend a ton of money exploring a tech solution, put it out into the world, and it just dies. So we're like their prototyping tool. That was not what we intended to be. Very cool to see that they're making the use of it like that.
I was just going to say, I think that the validating factor, like validating your model and product market fit, is actually like a perfect use case for no-code tools, right? The rapid and efficiency increase is huge. For me, like I'm not one to build end-to-end in no-code. I've worked as like a PM, most like during my career, product analyst. I live in data, but in order to derive some of like the insights I'm trying to look for in a 2-week design sprint, right, it's just not going to be feasible to do without allowing for some of our non-technical team to build a no-code solution, so I can mock it up, and that's actually basically user test against a no-code product that will eventually fit directly within our product itself. Like, eventually we'll add it to a roadmap, but that all comes in no-code testing, and validation via no-code. We don't actually anymore test at all or do any of our design sprints in code.
That's cool.
Any other questions?
I have actually a question for Thomas as well about the product and how. So I can see this service I've never heard about it before. It sounds pretty cool, and I can see it fit into many other audiences, of course. So I'm curious about how you personalize it to your audience, to lawyers, in terms of getting the users, but also in terms of the interface as well.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you market to lawyers and personalize the experience for lawyers? Yeah,
and also, if I understood the question properly, it's this thing, what we call the app builder, could be used by insurance. It could be used by banks. Like, why is it focused on attorneys? We initially came up with this like matchmaking platform, so we always focused on the legal sector. Once we had the app builder, we did consider a little bit like, okay, it could just be a generic app builder, but we thought that introduces too much drag. Like, that's too difficult. We don't want to, it's tough to sell a general purpose sandbox that can do anything. We were talking about this earlier. That sounds cool to you, but it's what we found it to be a very poor sales tactic. So by drilling in just for attorneys, and even amongst them, just like sharpening exactly what we say it can do, we think, I mean, we haven't actually tried selling to insurers or other folks, but we think that's made our job a lot easier.
Do you guys have any plans to maybe explore doing like community.insurance, right? Like, and try it, keep it separate from the Community.Lawyer like platform, but leverage the same network that you have to maybe share it along?
We're a 4-person company with like more work than we can do. It's like that like makes my stomach hurt just thinking about it. Yeah. Maybe, yeah, if everything goes right, maybe, but it could, TBD. Yeah.
Secondary to the current mission.
Yeah. And that's been one of the hardest things. This is a bit of a tangent, but like that's been one of the hardest things is like saying no to perfectly valid ideas because they come on a long list of valid ideas and you got room, you got time for the top 3. They got 10 great ideas, but you gotta kill some of them.
Yeah, prioritization becomes difficult when
Yeah.
you feel like you're onto something big, but it's such an open technology world that just sharing the idea might be the wrong step, right? And then kind of lost that traction you might have had. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that you focus on the community more.
And we even focus on solo and small firm attorneys, and we focus particularly on consumer legal issues. So like even amongst the legal sector, like we're segmenting who we're talking to. Yeah.
I'm curious for Nash, same question. Like, how do you guys personalize Clay for your users, for your companies?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Clay, first invested in Clay in 2017. The team raised an A in the summer of last year. That was 2 years of building a super broad product and then trying to figure out who the hell is going to use this and how the hell are they going to use it. And so it's been about 4 or 5 months we've been focusing on sales operations as this first use case, like people who spend a ton of time building lists of people and companies. And then even within that, it's like, okay, well, what stage of company is interesting to you? Like, when are people likely to adopt the product? Is it pre-Salesforce? Is it post, Airtable? But even within that, like, it's kind of similar to a recruiting use case. But no, don't look at the recruiting use case because you don't have time to build out the functions for the recruiting use case. And so I think for us also that it's all a process of feeding out, and we'll be focusing on this for like the rest of this year likely, and then having some traction there. And then if it's not the case, then you like pivot slightly into what the next thing means. But I think for us, we're feeding a fair amount of traction there at the time being. But we do think about like on the website, do you have like sales ops? Then you click on like growth hackers. Like, do you have multiple landing pages that you're playing with, which is what Zapier and Airtable played around with a ton for like SEO. And then just from the first from perspective, having been investors in Notion, that's also the journey that Notion went on, where they spent like X amount of time figuring out like when you build a canvas, how do people start to like use all of this white open space or this sandbox? And so then you're estimating like what is the thing that we want to pursue first, and then if it works, great, and if not, then we like pivot slightly.
To follow up on that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is that the reason why Clay is still in like a request access only beta? Is like to make sure that you're focusing on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we still have like a ton of developers that are signing up. So this website is actually coming down like next week. That's one of my pet peeves, is like the website doesn't say what we're doing at the moment. So we're going to bring that down and put up a new website. We gated access for that reason. And so rather than like trying to satisfy everyone, we have a fair amount of early customers that we're focusing on. And so onboarding through the next couple of months will be primarily through intros or through folks who request access who are a good use case. And then going deep on that before we like start to open up access through the rest of this year.
What kind of customers are your early?
Yeah, sure.
Question was, what kind of customers are your early users?
So sales operations leaders at B2B companies, and anywhere from like Series A through to like some of ours are just pre-IPO, and it's a section of the company that's using them. We have a fair amount of like companies that sell into developers, which is interesting to us just given that we have a developer community too, but it's primarily sales operations, like sales leaders, heads of growth at that stage of a B2B company. Yeah. Is that you? We should talk after.
No,
just kidding.
maybe.
I'm kidding.
One follow-up question I had was, I think I might know the answer, but why does Clay, why is the spreadsheet kind of like the center of the Clay interface? We've seen that with Glide, Sheet to Site. I'm sure some folks have heard that product.
Yeah.
A lot of other products are built off of like a table, a grid.
Absolutely.
What was the thesis behind that, do you think?
So a lot of people will talk about like there's like 20 million developers, but there's 1 billion people that use spreadsheets in the world, and it's like, and it's true. It's people are thinking computationally without realizing it sometimes, and like having these relations cell to cell, or like, and it's a really basic form of programming actually. And so for us that was interesting, but then also the ability to run different types of data into a spreadsheet and build all of the sources of data is like why that we started off with like
bases, which is spreadsheets, workflows, and then functions very separately. And now the three kind of come together into this product, which is a spreadsheet that fills itself with the two of those fitting neatly into it. And the one thing else also is one of the reasons that we were so excited about Glide when we invested at first round was that they started, while all of these other products are like starting super broad and then zeroing in on the first use case, David, who's the founder there, is like very specific, and this is how we want people to use the product, and then we'll layer it on. And that was a different insight to a different type of founder market fit that was contrary to like how other people were building these types of products, which is like insight and then grow it out.
I should say also, I think there's a lot of you guys may also notice most of the no-code tools are built with some sort of spreadsheet functionality, because that is this function has our database, right? The way we would spin up a database, we're just using the rows and the sheets in relational form, like Airtable does.
Yeah.
That is the exact way a database is functioning when you're calling the different functions to the database.
Yeah.
So by starting there, you have so much flexibility in building applications that would be powered just like any other database.
Yeah. The thing that's super cool is also in all of these like customer interviews or customer early meetings, and like if you dig far enough, everyone has a spreadsheet somewhere where they're just like throwing their shit in, and then it's like not up to date and they're kind of pissed about it, but like you like dig far enough and you'll always find a spreadsheet that has like some kind of pain point but like huge utility, which is fascinating. You have a spreadsheet?
I have a spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet.
Do lawyers have spreadsheets?
Lawyers, a lot of lawyers have spreadsheets, absolutely. I have an Airtable for my CRM. It sucks to update it after every time I get off the phone or get off an email. I have to, because inevitably time's gonna go by and I'm gonna be like, I know there's a conversation I should be following up on. The spreadsheet seems to be old. So
everyone has a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Please help me fix that.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
Let's go here.
I was just browsing the Clay website.
Yes.
And I saw it's beautiful.
Thank you.
But you said there's a completely new one.
Yes.
Well, the current one's nice.
Thanks.
But I saw at the bottom of the site that there's join us on Slack.
Yes.
I'm very interested, because we were just talking about this at my company, how we build a community around a product.
Yeah.
We also want to reach out to developers
Yep.
who like the idea of leveraging a low-code tool. But we're torn on which platform we should build this community. It's like a religious debate at this point. I've experienced in so many different clubs and organizations. It's the idea that, oh God, another Slack team, they're not gonna, there's too much friction, they're not gonna go in there. But then you set up a discourse and it's too remote.
It's also,
So I'm just curious, how has the Slack team been?
How has our Slack been? Yeah.
So the question is, what platform did you decide? How did you decide what platform to build your community on?
It's a great question. I don't think we've decided yet. We have a Slack, and it's like mostly people who are like, why doesn't this thing work? And you're like, okay, sorry, fixing it now. But I think that this is something I'm super excited about at Clay, is how do you do community slightly differently? And that comes a lot from First Round, which is like their whole basis of First Round is community and like actionable conversations and value creation, etc. And so one of the things that I'm excited about is how do you start to even have conversations with the developer community offline sometimes, where they feel tied to the product that you're building, the community that you're building, without you pushing your product onto them. And so that's something that we'll be playing around with over the course of the spring. There's a dear friend who was a developer advocacy at Warby Parker who like loves in person. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to think through is like, how do you build community slightly differently? The platform that it ends up being on, I don't know, but that's what we're trying to think through at the moment.
Yeah, we'd love to have New York events. It's just that our customers are
they're everywhere.
Spread across the wide.
Yeah.
Think about this meetup right here. It's a pretty good example of like how Bubble gets associated right with different types of builders and makers and creators by being partnering with. So partnering maybe finding some similar organizations to partner up with, and then find the similarities, find the syncrasies, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Because I think that leveraging not just their established communities, but the piece of that community that's missing might be a solution that you guys come. So I think that you should also start looking at some similar communities around.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I have two thoughts. One of which is like community why, like community for community's sake is where it starts to be challenging. Like what are the conversations that you're starting with your community, which is why people engaging with the community. And then Notion has done a great job of community and like how do you empower people to be advocates. And they set up like the Notion meetup community is crazy because you just have a bunch of creators that are constantly bringing other creators together. And so how you give people the tools to be advocates for you is really, really interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They're not running the community on their own software, I imagine, right? Like it's not.
People are sharing and showing the things that they've done.
Purely volunteer. I spoke at one a couple months ago. They all cooked their own food and brought it.
Wow, that's love.
Yeah.
Wait, so it's not actually organized by Notion?
They toss them some stickers and give them some guidance.
Yeah,
and, say,
and you're like a Notion ambassador. Yeah.
It's a little bit similar for the product front. Like,
yeah.
We're giving the full, full autonomy over this meetup group. Besides the very few global events, like the first one, there'll be several of those this year. Besides that, their goal is have us determine who is a product community member, who is a no-code community member, and discuss on our own what we want to discuss. If they're leading that conversation, they might as well just send it in a newsletter.
Yeah.
Because like that allows for us as a community to achieve the maximum amount from the people we can learn from without having to try to compare to what it would be like to be at the LA meetup or the San Francisco meetup where you're learning from the team themselves.
Yeah, Product Con's a really good example of it too.
Yep. Any other questions, Eric?
Yeah, you both have previous lives. So what do you miss about that, and what don't you miss about that?
So the question is, you have previous lives. What do you miss about your previous life, and what don't you miss about your previous life?
We talk about this a lot. Work-life balance. I think there's what is it called? Like hustle porn. Like it's cool to always be busy, have no life, put in 80 hours a week. It was cool. It's not cool anymore. We are community lawyer, and it's a very dangerous thing to tie your identity to this company that's going to be fluctuating up and down quite dramatically. So I miss I'm a strong advocate for having a life outside of work, and for myself, I'm a strong advocate for myself to do that. It's tough. I miss that very much.
I think similarly, I was going to say, I thought I was very busy when I was investing. I was not busy, actually. I was like making myself busy. So I actually have shit to do, and like if it doesn't get done, it's like not good. But I think the one thing I do miss is, the other thing I miss is seeing a bunch of like founders that are building stuff into the world, and that's awesome. And it's like people are building things like data science for Alzheimer's, and then you have to get somewhat smart on it relatively quickly, but you're always learning from the people in front of you more than you'll ever know. And so I miss part of that too, which is cool.
I got something else to add, actually. In my old job, I was a securities attorney for a while, and I would often work with folks who didn't care, and I didn't care. And it's like, I'll soak up the feelings of people around me. It's like, they're doing it because it's their job, I'm doing it because it's my job, and like it's just a downward spiral. It's like, we want to get it done, we have to get it done, no one really cares. But then, continuing as a securities attorney, I started working with founders. They very much cared. And even though I was just doing the due diligence package for them, I started to care. And that's now a part of my daily life. Like, you only work with folks who give a shit, and that's infectious, and it makes a huge benefit in my day when I'm like heads down working on a problem and I can't figure it out, and then I get to connect with this other attorney, and they're so excited, they want to show me something. Like, I'm excited now, and that's great.
Sweet. Back there?
Yeah, this is kind of I think a two-part question, but I'm curious what role both of y'all see design and branding in particular playing as no-code develops. And I think the second part of this is the impact you see that having on kind of the coastal war that I feel like is going on in the startup ecosystem between SF and New York. And I feel like one of the reasons like Notion has taken off so much is because they got the branding figured out, but like that also took multiple iterations from them and the founders. And at the same time, I feel like New York has a much stronger ecosystem for branding, for positioning, for marketing, but has kind of like lacked in the technical side of things, and whether or not you feel no-code is actually going to propel New York in that sense, or where you see kind of like design and branding in relation to no-code.
So the question is, what impact does design and branding have on the no-code space, and how does that differ between New York and the West Coast?
Yeah, I think design and branding is so important. And when I got to Clay, we were all engineers, and so I was like, well, we should probably tell a story about what we're building. And I think it's super important. And the story that you tell is like why people believe in what you're building and like why they buy into it. Like to the point about community, it's more than just like the product, it's how you make them feel, etc. I think it's a really interesting question as to, will no code allow like more founders to, will it like allow founders to build more quickly in New York in the same way that like SF has a bunch of this very technical talent and New York doesn't necessarily yet? And I think no code will become no code until it just is a way of developing. And so like that's the no code branding in and of itself. And like how does it grow out of that branding at some point, where it'll just be a different type of software development. And so I think that you'll see more great companies coming out of New York that have like more technical leanings, or built on different types of platforms over the next couple of years. I think that's a great question. Yeah, it's cool.
I saw this cool product on Product Hunt, which for me like illuminates what I see as like the challenge of like no code and design. It's this designer named Pablo. It was product of the day, I think, yesterday. And you know, Notion's got that like very particular illustration style, like black and white, kind of silhouette looking shapes. Pablo made this cool UI kit you can use to very quickly build out those figures, just like get the Notion look. And this started this conversation like the design Twitter space. It's like, you got the designers, capital D design, like there's a craft, this is an art form, like this is making it petty. And then you get the other folks, designers who are more like product designers. There's also a ton of debate in the design community, like what these different terms mean. Yeah. But product designers will be like, I'm just trying to get something built using any tools I have. I don't give a shit about like capital D design, like I'm trying to solve a real problem here. They're the ones who I think are going to be reaching for the no-code tools first. And I see the no-code space interacting best with those designers. The individuals who are like, I want to craft every single line of code to this thing, not because I think that's the best way to build it, but because like this is some Zen and motorcycle maintenance situation going on. Like this is this is me living my life. Like, and I think that's true. Like I feel that way oftentimes. Like my own portfolio website is handcrafted, CSS, HTML. Like I would never use like a no-code website builder, even though I think those make terrific portfolio sites and there's a ton of room for designers to use them. I see that as the difference. It's like you use no code to solve a problem because you care about building things. You use code because you're an artist and you're trying to craft something. And there's a space for both of them, but I see the no code space talking to this community more so than that one.
I think I saw one more question here. No?
Yeah. Just open to anybody. Any limitations on that you see using no code versus code?
Any limitations on no code versus code?
We have a company in our office that uses Bubble to make their first prototype. Not even their first prototype. Their first prototype was a spreadsheet and a website they made on Squarespace. Yeah, and then they got a bit more traction. They got some funding. They used Bubble to make the next version of it. That took them to like a whole nother market. And now they're reaching the limits of it. And they're hacking it together. They're doing the best they can, but they're at that crossroads that I think a lot of people face. It's like, okay, well, has we reached the end of the road here? And I think that's fine. Like they got far, and now they have money in their bank account. They can entertain those choices. That would have been the wrong call to make way back when they had no money. So I think there are limitations, but that's not a detraction. Like that's part of what makes it useful. It's the limitations makes it easier to use.
Yeah, similarly, I'd say that what you have is like a bunch of different pieces right now, and sometimes you need that custom code to get it to go a little bit further. And so I think that that's the where you butt up against like the edges of the sandbox when you want to do more, and then just how strong like 3,000 zaps a day can be, right? Like when does it start to get rickety with all of the things that you're stitching together, and at what point do these things start to like actually come together in a way that is more sturdy and you can build big companies on?
My thing is it's a good problem. If you've butt up against the limits of a no-code platform, you're in a great situation. That's a great problem.
That's a really good point.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, so I'm sure Toma and Nash will stick around afterwards, but just give me a quick round of applause for to talk to us about no code. And I think Eric's going to say a few words about Bubble.
If you haven't already, grab some food. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you want to just give it a quick refresh and then go through again? Yeah, if you could just refresh it so it starts from the beginning, just so I can walk through. Yeah, refresh the whole thing because of the animation. Yeah, no worries. All right, guys, we're Bubble. You guys are in our office right now. And how many of you have heard of Bubble before? Excellent. So this might actually be a little redundant then. We let you fully launch tech products, right? You get to build entire tech products. And so what that means is everything we just talked about, you can do with us in a very different way, in a very open-ended way. Just to give you an idea, this is a look at our interface, give you an idea of just how open-ended it is. We have property editors for each of the properties that we use. So this specifically is a map. Inputs, buttons, and they all update in real time as you're working on them. You can see actually someone going through right now, adding all these different features. We have workflows so that any of the features that you create on your front end can then be connected to your back end, to those sheets that we were talking about earlier, right? Straight to your database. You pick the different kinds of information you want, you outline it so that the sandbox you're playing in knows what you're dealing with, and then you can update your back end. So you guys are mostly familiar with this. I'm going to throw it out there. Anyone have any questions about Bubble that you've run into recently? No? All right, that's actually pretty great. Just give you an idea of the kind of companies that have been built on Bubble. So I'm actually going to disagree with what Toma was saying, that if you do come up against any kind of limitations, they're few and far between. You can really build some very large and successful companies using no code. And here are some examples. We have Dividend. They've processed over $1 billion in solar loans through their platform, entirely built on Bubble. Raised $365 million. They recently got bought by a private equity company. McKinsey used us to do this incredibly large survey. And then Plato, they built their entire back office. They featured us when they raised their funding and went through YC. What's up?
I touch on it when I just introduced myself as well, but I was going to say, my experience, the least amount of tech debt end to end is actually to stay with Bubble and not switch off and turn it to, a fully developed, hard-coded application. If you're true, like a Bubble expert, and you get to that level, like you'll start to notice more and more functionality that you can add that you probably roadmapped out down the road for a developer to develop on in code, that through time and experience and understanding the platform and its functionality, you'll realize, I believe, that you don't necessarily need to bring on a developer and move off the no-code platform.
I think that's going to be true for both of your platforms as well. You don't need developers. What I found is there are two kinds of developers. Ones who are artists and they only want to use the skill they have and they really lean into that. And the others who are like, oh wait, you mean I can do all this stuff quickly? I can get this out the door, I can test this idea and really start building a business and focus on the bespoke pieces that I really need to lean into. Instead of building another login, I can focus on the AI part of this. I can focus on the algorithm that's going to put two people on a date together. I don't have to build the user interface and go back and forth with my product department about the color of the button. All right, you can really start to lean into your business. And we encourage you guys to come to our meetups as well. We help host all the no-code ones, but if you want to learn specifically how to use Bubble, we encourage you to check us out. And if you point your cameras at that, you get a free personal plan just for 1 month. You can try out some of the bigger features with us. Just to give you a heads up, this Thursday we're running one on plugins. So the extensibility we talked about earlier, if you guys want to learn a little more about how that works on our platform, and honestly across the board on any platform, you can get an idea with that meetup on Thursday.
I highly recommend that. It's APIs, like the workflow, the API connector that they have, that's going to go on to our Thursday. There's a lot of functionality that I believe many of you probably assume will later actually handle by a developer, that you'll, I think, learn how you can actually do that. Okay? Yeah. And also, so I'm Brendan. I am one of the product hunt community. Oh, with mics. Yeah. I'm one of the product hunt community organizers for New York City. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying, for those of you who are interested in, in more information about launching on Product Hunt, how to gain, some support, following, some of the right tactics, I'm more than available to. You can contact me on Twitter, email, in the meetup group. I am more than happy to, walk through your projects that you're working on, give you some advice on how to, use the Product Hunt community to your advantage. The one thing I'll preface with is, it's never, the one thing the Product Hunt community does, frowns upon is asking for upvotes. It's kind of manipulates the system. So product support, features, feedback, certainly available for that, and certainly available for strategies on how to effectively market to the Product Hunt audience. So if any of you would like help on that, I'm certainly available as well.